anyone.
Could be anyone. Let's start. How are you enjoying this con so far?
It's fantastic. I mean, right from start to finish, it's been really well organized. I met Jasen at the airport. It's nice to be back in the Pacific Northwest. I miss it up here. I slept really well on the first night, and yeah, everybody has been. You guys are all fantastic, and the organization has been stellar. It's wonderful.
Now you're from Western Canada, which is pretty much the Northwest, right? I mean, some people it's the same thing.
I mean, they call it the back 40 in Canada. That's where I'm from. I transitioned to Vancouver when I was 17 after my father passed away, and kind of started that part of my life more or less in the rainforest there. So I was closer to the Pacific Northwest, I guess, in the latter half of my first period in Canada, and my second period has been down here, I think, for the most part.
So having that transition, kind of translating that to the United States, it would be coming like from the Midwest to the coast, and being 17 years old, and it's obviously around the time that you started, doing your music thing. What was it like coming to a new area, coming to a new place at that age, trying to develop new friends? Is that how you got into Skinny Puppy? Is that what led to it?
So, kind of, in a way. So in Calgary, I remember kind of being in my one of my earliest memories is being in my sandbox playing with Tonka toys and digging up cat turds. And I was fixated on California, and I was fixated on California because of the fault zones and the earthquakes. But I said to myself, to my future dumb self, I said, no, who would live down in California with all of this chaos? In Calgary, there was maybe a windstorm every once in a while, but it was very safe. And so again, my former younger self was much brighter than me, and I ended up in California. In between that, when my father passed away, I was working as we had started a record company called Trend. Well, not started a record company, we started a distributor, and we got some labels like, it was Trend Records in Canada, and we were the agents for Alberta and British Columbia. And so we sold things like Joy Division, Unknown Pleasures, Mango, reggae labels, Blue Note Jazz, all this stuff that was off catalog in a lot of Canadian record stores. And so we did a Christmas, this is going to show you my criminal side, we did a Christmas thing. Christmas records were 100% returnable in the record business back then. So we had the bright idea of ordering a bunch of Christmas records like Mantovani and all this crap. And we thought, why don't we put them in grocery stores and in drugstores? So we got racks. The idea was to get racks. We'd have them all racked out, and we rented a truck, and we drove all around Alberta and putting these things into grocery stores. The unfortunate thing is the racks came from Montreal, and they got delayed. So we ended up, it was 2 weeks before Christmas, and you want to get these things, in the stores probably in late November or late October. So we were just behind the gun, and so we ended up putting these things all through the stores. It was a horrible, stressful time, and then came back after Christmas, and nothing had really sold. And so we ended up doing these scams where I would go in and talk to the manager. He would go and have a box and get the rack and tuck about 20 or 30 into a box that would go out, and then we'd count, and it was horrible. And so that was my first kind of foray into my own business, I guess. And that led me, after my father passed away, I went out and I took over Vancouver as an area, and then proceeded to kind of go off the rails in a weird way. I was a mobile DJ at one point, doing weddings, and I ended up doing the Royal Canadian Mounted Police without knowing I was doing the Royal Canadian Mounted Police for a New Year's party and I was taking mescaline. So I went out to the party, and I was like, oh my fucking God, Canadian Mounted Police. And I got through it, did all the dances, did all the shit, got through it. And I left, I thought everything was cool, and I was driving out of Kamloops, and there's 2 police cars behind me with the lights on. And I'm like, okay, I'm fucked. And I kept driving, just sweating. And eventually they stopped, they got out, waved goodbye, and I continued on. So very, very fortunate. That was one of my pre-careers. The other one was I taught ballroom dancing for a while. And they were training me to be a silver, I think I made it to a silver level or something like that. They wanted me to go into competition. But I got kind of weirded out because at that point I had met the underground crowd in Vancouver, and it was all late night. After hours, there was these speakeasies, and I was selling beer there, Mr. Toast and Club Soda, and I met an incredible group of people, obviously, and I was married at the time. My wife was from Alberta. She was 6. I know this is going to sound weird too, so don't judge me. She was 16. I was 19. She was being raped by her father, and so I had to confront her father, which I still don't really know how I did at that age, and had him sign off on her coming to British Columbia to marry me. Of course, she was, at that age, you think you're being a knight in shining armor, and in fact, I was just, probably prolonging her own dysfunction, and we parted very quickly in Vancouver. But that started that whole kind of move into the underground for me, and the transition. I'd been into a lot of dark music in Calgary. Joy Division was one of the first things I listened to. Unknown Pleasures, I think, or not Unknown Pleasures I was selling, but Closer was the album that kind of tipped me over the edge and made me start to see that, there's artists, this isn't all theater. There's artists that are actually telling things about their lives that are real and right on the surface, and it really resonated with me, like Syd Barrett did, and a few other artists that were akin to that. And that was a big inspiration for me, because it really made me feel like there's somebody else speaking in a vein or in a way that transcends just normal I love you, yeah, to something a bit more deep and connected with me very much. And then I ended up moving into an apartment with Gary Smith, who was in Images in Vogue, with Seven Key, Kevin Key, I should say. I always fuck that up, and he always corrects me. But it was Seven Key. I swear to fucking God, it was Seven Key. You've seen it at one time, right? Yeah. It was in that apartment that we started recording. I was recording with a guy named Greg Monk, some music that ended up being K9, and that's kind of how it all started. Sorry, long story.
No. So, following up on that, how did you develop your vocal style?
Oh, well, that's another drug tale, I guess. So at that time period, we were doing a lot of MDA. I don't know if it was available down here. We had this kind of MDA that was, it wasn't quite like ecstasy, it was like ecstasy and acid, so we would stay up all weekend. We used to do it in, this is going to sound terrible too, all of my foibles too, we would put the MDA in toilet paper and then swallow the balls, and sometimes they get caught in your throat and open up, and it was just, but by the end of the weekend, we all looked like we were electrocuted, basically. Anybody that came in, we were just like janked out, and from that, your voice would lower, and we would always play games with each other. Myself, Gary, Bill Lieb from Frontline Assembly was a big proponent for. We were partners in crime for a large amount of time. He would always be like, he had a good job, I had no job, so he'd be like, here, take this, because he wanted to stay up, so I'd be like, okay, another little ball of tissue, here we go. And that kind of created the name Ogre for me, came from that, just from all the oscillations of too much time up, little sleep, and a lot of screaming and yelling. We would scare the shit out of each other, basically. We'd be hiding around couches, and we'd watch horror movies. We just watched fucking like 14 hours of horror movies to where they all blended together. You just kind of come to at a part where you're like, I remember that. And then we'd scare the living shit out of each other. Like literally, somebody would be in the bathroom, they'd be outside. You'd just be terrified the whole time, but super fun.
So, your lyrics, very thoughtful, very meaningful. Earlier, when I was talking to you before the con started, you said that Skinny Puppy was an autobiography for you. Did you feel like it was time to end Skinny Puppy because that autobiography, your autobiography, didn't match the Skinny Puppy aesthetic anymore, and it was time for you to move on and do your own thing?
Yeah, I mean, twofold. Kevin and I, I always felt Kevin never liked me in the band, and there's times he didn't, and we've had moments where in Whitehorse in the Yukon we had a fight in a hotel lobby that was pathetic, but we were flicking cigarettes at each other. So we've gone through a lot. There's that aspect to it. The acrimony worked for a number of years. There's definitely a talk back going on between us, whether it's through samples and the vocals and things like that. For me, Skinny Puppy, when I look back on it, obviously, I was very shy when I started Skinny Puppy. I should probably never have been up on the stage right now talking to you all. But it really gave me, it was a great confidence builder for me. But at the time, I was extremely shy and definitely going through some stuff that, since kind of worked out. But to me, the essence of Skinny Puppy was putting it all on the surface and putting it all out there. Straight from, I did a bit of study with a Polish theater. It was a guy named Grotowski, which dealt with the idea of not using logic. If you have input, you have immediate output without thinking about it or trying to intellectualize it or anything like that. So I used that a lot as a method of theater in a way. And Artaud's Theater of Cruelty I was kind of fascinated by. And Muldor, which is one of my favorite books of all time, by a guy named Lautremont. And it was his pen name. He died of starvation at 26 when horse meat was really expensive in France. And he wrote a book basically that was embraced by the surrealists, and I was really into surrealism, Chandelier and Dali, all that stuff. I was fascinated by. So I had this kind of bent into a more surreal sort of mindset, which led to the drugs and everything like that. But I wanted to kind of be very honest with what was happening to me at the time, and it both saved me and also took me to the edge, basically. And so Too Dark Park was kind of the peak for me, as far as that surreal kind of where I was living in the moment on that stage. I still get goosebumps thinking about it, although I have kind of staggered memories. Memory is a weird thing, right? I mean, there's not much photography or film from that tour, but for me, it was a living phantasmagoria. It was incredible. It was just, and it kept building on itself. I tend to take tours on with like rough sketches, and then kind of as I go through with the Grotowski thing, whatever's happening on stage with people, with what's happening in the moment, you can grab things out of the ether, that gratuitous moment, which is where a lot of amazing creative stuff comes. So never, always be ready for the gratuitous moment. All of you, there's a lot of creative people in here, I think. So you have to kind of be ready for that at any time. And then it took a turn after Too Dark Park into Last Rites, where I kind of took too much on, and things got very dark, and I won't go into that necessarily. Last Rites is kind of a document of delusion in a lot of ways, and was the downfall. One of my favorite Crowley books. I don't really subscribe to Crowley. I'm kind of more of the Groucho Marx. Anybody that would have me, any club that would have me, I wouldn't want to be a member of, kind of thing. I've always been like that. So I've never been, a Satanist or whateverist. But the one book that I really found amazing by Crowley was Diary of a Drug Fiend. I think it's an amazing anti-drug book. And so that's kind of where I sit now with it all. Is just I'm very lucky to have gotten through it. But getting back to your question, yes, at the end of that, this last tour for me was trying to, in a way, focus on a more character-driven thing, dealing with the idea of where we're at now. I was trying to figure out a way to deal with the divisiveness in our world right now, and it's not just in America, but it's in Canada, it's everywhere, in Europe. And so I was trying to figure out something without being specific, so I came up with the idea, the trope of the other, which is what we project all of our fears onto. And so the idea, instead of using an ethnicity or a religion, I thought of using an alien. And so that took me to kind of, I felt like the end of that cycle, in the sense that I wouldn't want to take away any of the strength and the power of that reality. And the hardest thing for me now, because I'm in love, is that I have a bit of that imposter syndrome. Christina F. I don't know if anybody's read Christina F. When she stops being a drug addict, she's like, what the fuck do I do now? Because where's the inspiration come from and stuff like that. So there was a transition kind of, Ogre helped me through that transition. And then kind of going back and revisiting, it just is time to kind of close the chapter on all of that based on all of the crap I just told you.
Skip to the next one. It's like, you kind of answer that next one.
Yeah.
That one.
Oh, yeah. So what musically are sort of your goals with your solo projects with Ogre? How is that in your mind? How do you separate that from Skinny Puppy?
Really easily.
Yeah. Or musically, what are you looking?
Well, so there was two types of writing styles. Kevin's form of writing music was very kind of he wanted a voice to kind of go over his soundtrack music basically. So he didn't really want a vocal. He wanted more of an instrument, and so that's why a lot of the early Skinny Puppy stuff was a lot harder to understand. And I think I needed to change that because I started kind of learning to sing better, and or maybe not better, but more clarity, I guess. And I've also had in my life a huge pop bug. I have that sugar-coated pop thing going on in me with a lot of stuff that goes back to the Archies when I was a kid with Sugar and stuff like that. Even though that was recorded by the Wrecking Crew, which was a huge, they were studio musicians. But I have that kind of sweet tooth to me. So and there's a lot of '80s music that I liked. I even back when we partied, there was the girls. The girls were in the room. They liked Kajagoogoo, and the boys liked Throbbing Gristle. So, but as time goes on, you're at 4 a.m. You become loose, and you're like, wait a minute, I'm grooving to Kajagoogoo. What the fuck? So, and I always like things like Orchestral Maneuvers in the Dark, even though they were connected to Factory at a certain point. Factory kind of changed me in a lot of ways. So I have this pop thing in me, and then when I kind of started working with Mark up in Seattle on the first Ogre record, he wanted me to go to a vocal coach. And I was like, no, that'll change me. Again, the Christina F. thing, right? I'll be different when I come out the other end. And I went and just realized that I should have done it years earlier to strengthen my voice. So I went out to a guy named David Peter Kyle out in Alki Beach. Is that right? Does that make sense? Yeah. He was a 90-year-old baritone in the New York Symphony. Big pot belly, 2 hearing aids, and he'd sit over the piano like this, out of a microphone. He did tapes all the time. Incredible experience, and so that changed me to kind of look at things in a different way. Mark was more. Basically, I'll sum it up by saying Skinny Puppy was about a composition with a vocal writing over top of it, for the most part. And Ogre became something. Mark was like much more of a producer in the sense that if you're going to write a vocal album, the music should support the vocal, and that was a totally different 180-degree way of writing music. So we would come up with ideas. He would have really cool shit, and I would come up with a vocal idea, and he'd be like, okay, well, let's take. I'd be like, no, don't take that bass line. He goes, no. And he'd do something. He would support the vocals. So we were very much in tearing things down and building them back up again, whereas Skinny Puppy was kind of like, it was set in place. That's what it is.
So, I mean, you're one of the pioneers of industrial music. After the final tour, looking back after the 40 years of music you created and the inspirations that the people you've inspired, what are some key moments, like what were some of the positive takeaways that you had from this journey, and maybe some negative ones too that you want to share that you feel make for a good story?
Positive ones are based on the negative ones in a weird way. So I was heading down a really dark place where I felt like as a kid, when I would go see, I had 2 experiences. I had a car crash, and then prior to that, I used to love going to drag races for some reason. I don't know why. I have no clue. I used to like the magazines, I like how they looked. And so we went to a drag race, and I wanted to see a crash. I was like, that's really cool.
I think they made a movie about this. Yes.
possibly. And so we went, and I was in the stands, and yes, there was an accident. And my reaction to it was a lot different than I thought it would be. I found myself in a cathartic way kind of hoping that the person was okay and was safe from it. And it was totally different than I got worried, I got very concerned, and similar when we were in an accident, so a car got T-boned and we were hit by it, and then that car spun around. I was more worried about the person in the car, kind of. And so I started thinking that maybe there's something to this theatrically, is that if I put myself through a lot physically on stage, to the point of hurting myself, that could create in people a positive feeling of, well, I hope he doesn't do that. And I realized that was true. We kind of experimented in Two Dark Park with Guinea Pig. I don't know if you guys know those films. Japanese films, very realistic stuff. Back then there was confusion whether it was snuff or not, so we kind of glommed onto that, knowing it was theatrical, but wondering how people would react if we use a lot of imagery that's dark, horror films and things like that cut together. And so I wondered if suddenly you inserted some of that into the video stream, whether it would change people's perspective. And I was really gratified to see that, yeah, people were throwing up, leaving, telling me I was an asshole. How could you do that? How could you show that shit? And I was like, okay, there's hope for humanity. So that was kind of I think a positive thing for me, and hopefully a positive thing for the audience, even though I guess I was kind of tricking them in a way, which is terrible. And then the final thing is so I got to a point where I thought I had to keep upping the car crash aspect of my performance, and very lucky to be ambulatory right now and talking to you, I must say. But I got to a point, for example, in Two Dark Park, where I was using an ice pick, and I was sticking it into my arm, and I was doing that every night. I was numb on cocaine, so it was just like, you could put an ice pick through my head, and I probably would be talking to you fine right now. But and it was in Orlando or St. Pete, I think it was at St. Pete outside, and I was in the front row and I stuck it in, and usually it would just go in and out and there'd be a bit of blood, whatever, but that night it just went right in, and it went really deep, and it was so much so that there was no wiggle, and it was a long thing, and I was just like, I was freaked out on stage, and the whole front row could tell I was freaked out. And I didn't want to pull it out, so I wasn't sure if I hit an artery. And so I sat there like, bah, 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 I'm freaked out right now, and finished the song, and then got off stage, went back and pulled it out, and I didn't bleed, which was great. And then I was just like, okay, take me back to the hotel room so I could do more drugs. And I got back to the hotel room, and there was a call that came through. I don't know how, to this day. And it was a group of kids that called in, and they were crying. And they said, you don't need to do this for us. And I almost tear up when I hear that. It was a life-changing thing for me, because I realized at that point that I didn't have to be this dark character in a lot of ways. I could be kind of myself. I'm kind of a goofball. I'm kind of an overly nice person in a way. And I realized that it was an amazing gift to me, I guess is what I'm saying. And I've cherished it to this day, because it allowed me to be who I am right now, I guess.
Have your collaborations with other artists like Ministry, Pigface, KMFDM, has that allowed you to be Ogre, like you're saying, in a different way when you're not the center?
Yeah.
You don't feel the pressure to be.
Well, I mean, with them, I was always a goofball. I
Yeah.
mean, with Ministry, I was kind of the mascot of Ministry, I think. When I was on those early tours on the Mine is a Terrible Thing, Al was such a, he was just a, I can't tell you. The one story, we were rehearsing for Mine is a Terrible Thing, and we were all on heroin. So many drugs. And Al was like, we sound fucking like shit. You're all shit. He goes, we're all quitting heroin. We're all not doing heroin. So then it was just like, so we had 2 rehearsals, and then on the 3rd rehearsal we sounded like shit. And Al was like, we sound great. Let's go. So we're back on heroin. So there's things like that. I mean, I had a great experience. I was always, during the ministry things, I was a bit of a wallflower on that tour because there was a lot of really, strong personalities, and that's where I bonded with Paul Barker. Was on that tour. Paul Barker and Bill Rieflin were kind of the voice of reason. They were in the back lounge reading books, while the heroin people were up in the front drinking. We had 3 bottles of Bushmills we had to drink every day by rule. And, and I was just kind of along for the ride, kind of, in a way. So meeting Paul was incredible back then. I was very impressed by him, and that's come up to this day. Right now I'm working on an album with Paul, and super excited about it. And, he's wanted to do it for a while, and I just kind of realized within the context of Skinny Puppy, I didn't know, my partner in Skinny Puppy when he started working, and that's been a 4-year relationship. It's nice to know somebody like Paul, who I've known since the 80s, and I've had a really good relationship with, to be in a project with. It's very, very comforting and wonderful. So, that was great. Sasha, and that whole clan treated me really well. It was a lot of fun going out with them. We're still friends, and all the collaborations I've been very lucky with. Mark Block has been an amazing collaborative force too, as far as just kind of showing me a different side to things, for sure. I always pick things up from people. That's what I do. I'm not a great teacher. I'm a great learner, if that makes any sense.
Before I get into the Repo questions, which I'm sure everybody's very
That's
excited
next.
for, I have to ask a personal question, because my favorite, personal for me, is my favorite movie that you took part in was the Doom Generation. And even though it was just a small part.
It wasn't the Goons. We're the Goons.
The Goons. Just reading about Craig Araki and how he makes films and how he directs and how it goes, would you mind telling us about what it was like connecting with him and being on set, and maybe a little bit of the story about what happened during filming?
Dark story. So he reached out. So we were recording the process in Malibu, which had already started with fires and was a bit chaotic. Dwayne, we didn't realize, was in a lot of trouble, and it was right at the beginning of that process. I know, touche. We got a call from Greg, and he was a fan and wanted us to come down, and so we were like, sure, why not? It was close by. It was just down the coast. And so we arrived. We met lovely Rose McGowan, was incredible. James Duvall was so cool, and I've kind of kept in touch with him off and on to this day, and he's never changed. He's an amazing guy, really, really super sweet. So we smoked some joints and talked, and then we started filming, and it was a stunt scene on the car. We come up and we're like, "Wake up, cocksucker, time to die," and we bang on the windows, and Kevin jumps up on the roof, and they had basically around the car they had just some really thin mattresses. And so, it was a low-budget production, and that's the way it was. And Kevin took a fall off the car, and he fell right on his face, like a little kid would fall on the face. It was really weird, super fucking weird, because, you think that somebody falls off a car, it's kind of like, you watch stunt people doing it, you're like, oh, it's really dramatic. It was not that way at all. It was like a little kid falling off, and, when you're a kid, you fall off your bike, and you get up, and you're like, I'm okay. It was kind of like that, and I felt so bad for him, because you realize that he wasn't okay. He put his tooth through his lip. He shattered his elbow and fucked up his knee. And so the whole tone of that night changed after that. After we left for the hospital, you could tell there was us, there was them, and in the middle was a line labeled liability. And so we spent the rest of the night kind of in this weird kind of warped world, and that's really my memory of it when it comes down to it. And then after that, I was kind of like, I need to put this in the background, because Kevin was dealing with the legal part of it and stuff like that. And I don't think we ever talked to Greg again either, which is kind of sad in a way, because it just really put a knife in the water, so to say.
Yeah. So how did your casting come about for Repo, the genetic opera?
So my Repo cast.
And is acting something you've been interested in pursuing?
I'm fascinated in acting because it's hard. It seems that the best people make it look easy, but it's fucking hard. And also I think that for me, I was just doing an interview at Voltaire's place. I haven't done an interview. I'm much more comfortable here. Thank you very much. At Voltaire's, it was 3 in the morning. We'd gone out. We had a nice dinner. We watched the film Demonatrix, and then he made me a old-fashioned. And so I'd already had 2 drinks. I don't drink very often. So I was kind of 3 in the morning. We did an interview, and I was like, "Holy fuck, this is hard," you know. Again, so acting has always been a weird thing. Again, because I'm a very kind of shy, introverted person. Acting is difficult. So my first audition was for The Crow. I was supposed to be the guy who killed Brandon Lee, and I got the part.
Wow.
Sick boy.
Fun boy. And so I went in and. I don't know if you guys have seen The Crow, obviously, right? So, you know, I don't know the character arc. The guy with the long black hair who's the head of the gang, he was sitting next to me. I didn't know him, but I kind of recognized him from some other films. He was sitting next to me. I went in and did my audition, and I'd worked with an acting coach a little bit. I walked in, there was Alex Proyas, there was the assistant director reading to me the girl's part. And in the back, in the darkness of this small room, kind of were like Skeksis, were all these producers, and I fucking failed miserably. It was terrible. I was awful. I walked out, and that actor that I'm talking about was there, and he looked at me and he goes, "Didn't go very well, did it?" No, probably never act again. And so I sat down just to kind of collect myself. He went in, and I heard his audition. I was like, oh, that's how you do it. And so I didn't have another chance until Repo, and Repo wanted actors that could sing. They didn't want singers that could act. So Darren Bousman was a little kind of, he didn't, you know, it wasn't warmed up to me at all, really. It felt that way to me. We've since become friends, so it's not a big deal, and I can self-denigrate myself to hell, so be prepared. So I walked in, and I had an idea, so I had my mirror, which I had an idea for, and I walked in. It was a studio in Burbank, and I was sitting outside in the hallway, and just sitting there waiting, kind of going over my shtick, and I heard the doors open in the studio, and all of a sudden, who comes out but Paris Hilton? She comes by, she's like, "Hi." I'm like, "Hi." And I'm like looking at my mirror going, "Oh my God." And then she walks out, and there was, the streets were empty when I came in the studio. When she walks out, there's flash, 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 flash. And I'm going, okay, this is fucking Hollywood, right? So I go in and I do my thing, and Darren's in the back over there in the corner, sitting down on the ground, kind of unimpressed. Terrence, who's the grave robber in the film who wrote the music, and Darren Smith were vying for me, like they were on my side. So everybody was kind of, you know, giving me support, and I went my thing. I had this little spiel of Pavi is from a place in Italy called Pavice, which is a place, and I was going that, you know, like I can't cry, I have to wipe away my tears, you know, because my face is so fucked up. And at the end, I was like, "Do you want to see Pavi?" And they're like, "Yeah." And I'm like, "You want to see fucking Pavi?" And I had in my mirror, I turned my mirror like this, and in my mirror was a picture of Paris Hilton. And I was like, I'm either fucked now or whatever. And they applauded. And so I left that audition like Mary Tyler Moore at the beginning of, you know, I walked down the street throwing my hat up in the air. Didn't care if I got the part, but was thrilled that I had a good audition. And I ended up getting that part, which was great. So that was my process for getting a lot of those films.
So I'm guessing in Repo you probably didn't get much input in your lyrics. And correct me if I'm wrong. By the time you were done with the Devil's Carnival movies, were you able to interject some of your own lyrics, or?
Oh no.
No, it was all strictly.
It was all strictly. Like all of the stuff for Repo was recorded in that studio that we did the auditions in a month before we went up to Toronto. So it was all kind of, you know, we had a lip sync coach who was up there who gave me a great she gave me a vocal training thing called Big Voice. If you ever want a good vocal training thing, she's amazing. She did the John Waters movie Cry Baby on Broadway, and she was the vocal coach for that. So she did all the lip syncing stuff. So it was all lip synced beforehand and pretty much dialed in and stuff like that, you know. what was fun about it was just the relationships of going up there with that cast, you know, with Paul Sorvino and Sarah Brightman was incredible. It was just a really eclectic cast and it was wonderful people.
What was she?
She was amazing. So we bonded. I had a little blind Boston Terrier that was a long-haired Boston Terrier that was blind that I found down in a park in Los Angeles, and she looked like a Mogwai or an Ewok, a cross between a Mogwai and an Ewok. Super cute. And she had her dog there, and so we bonded with dogs. Same with Anthony Head. The dog was what got me in.
Did you read our next question?
No.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's literally, what was it like working with Sorvino and Anthony Head?
I was thinking about this last night, actually. For some reason, like, Paul came into my head. Paul was super kind to me. I met him first. We shared a cigar at the producer's house in the Hollywood, one of those Hollywood moments where you're like, what the fuck am I doing here? I'm sitting next to Paul Sorvino, smoking a cigar with him, choking. And then we went on set. You know, Paul was incredible. Both Bill and I were literally his kids. Bill would keep him laughing because I'm not funny, and I would be his doting son, you know, basically. And we were always around him. He did two really kind things to me. I had my first close-up, and they were like, you know, it was with Paul, and Paul was like sick that day. So they came up to me and they said, Ogre, Mr. Sorvino is not feeling well. Do you mind not doing, he won't be here for the close-up. I was like, I didn't expect that he was going to be here. I didn't really know, you know, as far as I was like, that's fine. You know, I thought this was all make-believe anyway. You know, I'm playing to the camera. And so I'm sitting there waiting for my close-up, my first close-up ever, and all of a sudden I hear this gate coming down, this walk coming down, and it's Paul. And I hear him go, no, it's his first close-up. No, I'm going to do it. And I was just like, oh, be still my heart. So then he sits down, and it was a scene where I was supposed to get a reaction from me because he's yelling at me. And he fucking tore a fucking pound of flesh off my ass. Fucking insulted the fuck out of me. And the only thing I could do was like, which made it in the film, and then afterwards, I was just sitting afterwards, I was like, my God, you know, like, and he got up and he comes over, he goes, we shared a moment, didn't we? Yes, we did, you know. And then the other thing he did to me was in the press, you know, we were doing Canadian press, and again, smart guy. We were doing Canadian press up in Toronto, and he both complimented me and got the quote in the newspaper. He spoke out saying that, oh, you know, Ogre, you know, it's the Canadian actor, right? The reason I was hired was because for probably, you know, film credit or whatever, they hired a Canadian lead. He's like, oh, Ogre, you know, he can really push through the mask, you know, he can really emote through a mask, and that's a very difficult thing to do. And I was like, God, he's smart. Like he like got the quote in the press and everything for the Canadian press. But he was super, super kind. Anthony Head was a sweetheart. It was a great cast. Everybody knew they were kind of doing something a bit, you know, left field and embraced it. And it's a drag that Lionsgate did what they did to the film. You know.
So did anyone have any idea it would become the cult classic that it has?
Well, I mean,
you were filming it?
They advertised it as such, which was a bit weird, you know. But I think everybody kind of knew that they were doing something special, you know, and you know, it was very supportive of each other, and even Paris, you know, you know, we all have weird, you know, preconceptions about people, but I was really touched by Paris in that she was also in the makeup chair before me, and she would usually be, because she would go out and do these events where she'd make $100,000 standing on a little table in a closed-off area at a party, and she invited us to one of those, and my girlfriend came down at the time, and she got to walk with Paris to do the strut thing in her classy dresses, and I went out to one of these events, and she would come back tired, so she would be sleeping in the makeup chair. And I was kind of touched to see she was reading a book on how to find a relationship. And I thought that was kind of sad and touching. And then the cutest thing she did was she would sit in her trailer smoking the best fucking weed I ever that she was able to somehow bring through security, no problem. Blessed be the elite. And I would walk by her trailer going, damn. And she was making, she made us all, the family, Bill, myself, and Paul, she made us all collages of each character. So mine had little hearts. It said Poppy steals all the hearts, and a portrait of us all. And she gave us all these in glass at the end of the shoot. So yeah, I was quite touched by that, and saw that, you know, even it's easy to be fooled by the way that people are perceived in the press, I guess.
Yeah, I had a friend that went to French school in LA with her in high school, and I asked her something similar to that, because it was back in the day when she was still in the media all the time, hoping that she would say, yeah, well, she's awful, or she did this, and she said the same thing. She's like, she was nice, she was kind of quiet, and I kind of felt bad for her. And it's weird saying I feel bad for a billionaire, but yeah, so it's interesting to see what the media portrays people to be.
Absolutely.
And what the people who actually get to have private moments with them
Absolutely.
know them to be.
I have my rice story too. You want to hear the rice story? I have two. So there was. I don't mean to denigrate Paris, but they were cute. The one was when we were doing the promo shots, and we were holding her. Me and Bill and Paul were holding her like this. She looks up and she goes, "Am I fat?" Of course not. And she wasn't. And then the other thing, we were doing a dance bit. I don't think it made it in the film, but may have made it in the extras. And we sucked. And so we had to come in on a Saturday morning at 8 in the morning. And so we were all sitting there waiting to rehearse and learn our dance moves from the choreographers. And she comes in and she's wearing gray sweatpants and she's got fried rice. And she reeks of weed. So once you get in the weed, I'm like, damn, you know? And so she's eating her rice, and all I remember was her walking out and me fixating on her butt, and she had a little piece of rice stuck. That's it.